So, tell us more about Anne herself. I mean, what was she like? Why did she create this house? What is it that interests you about her?
So Anne was a pretty typical.
Well, our focus is always on the Anne. Her husband, Ezra, owned his own home, and her wealth draws our attention to the oddity that becomes her house. But that's not where this story should focus. That's not where it really begins or its center. The real story is Josephine and the objects and legacy that she leaves behind. The way the story gets twisted and changed through time, I was totally misled at first. I thought the story was about architecture, about a time period, a family, but it's about a creative person, about attribution. It's about the precariousness of both these women's situations, but in completely different ways, and in ways that are utterly reliant upon each other.
There's a sailor who had worked for her dad on a ship who came and stayed at the house in Connecticut later, and he thought it was really quite silly that she had decorated the house so much like, the attic was a ship on the ocean, because as a sailor, like, that was the least comforting thing possible that you would want to surround yourself with. He thought it was quite brainless.
Well, why did she treat her house this way? I mean, from her early adulthood, she was doing this kind of thing to that house?
Hi, Angie. So I've been doing more reading, and I have some edits for the video that I sent you. Josephine didn't have a house. She had fled slavery via the Underground Railroad. Patricia and Frederick McKissick described the Underground Railroad as a whaling ship because so many slaves escaped, in part via whaling ships on the East Coast. Probably she escaped on one of William Sargasso's ships to Nantucket and then on to Connecticut, where she stays briefly in Anne's house.
Yeah.
So when is it that Abigail and Elizabeth moved to New London?
So their parents pass away in close succession to each other, and then.
Hi, here's another edit. The sisters moved to Connecticut in the midst of debate over Connecticut possibly outlawing the education of former slaves, really about outlawing schools to educate any black person who has come to the state to be educated. So while Anne's family and the Nantucket Quakers are abolitionists for the most part, there are no enslaved people settling on the island by 1783. Connecticut is a different story, and the matter comes down around the same time the Fugitive Slave Act is enacted. So Josephine is in really quite a precarious situation. She is still learning to read and write, though her education began elsewhere, and
increasingly doesn't leave the house.
She doesn't know necessarily where Anne is going to come down on this issue in Connecticut. Josephine flees in a hurry to Canada, but she leaves objects behind that I've recreated in the gallery. I imagine she's gone before Elizabeth and Abigail show up, before Anne's psychosis sets in, really. Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep working on these and hopefully send you some of the text soon.
Her family kind of leans into her idiosyncrasies rather than like kind of pushing against it, so they can help her with her projects, and like other sailors come and help her change the second floor and build this dome. So they're involved with her and they lean in rather than trying to stop her from what she's doing.
So her house becomes rather important for them, besides for her.
Right.
And then the house then becomes kind of the historical focus. She might be just written off, right, as just not being able to handle her grief, but instead there's this house.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing and kind of an anomaly.
Hey, it's me again. Okay, so here is another edit. See, her homes, plural, are certainly important. After several others, presumably the attic in Anne's home, where she first writes and notes down her ideas, she has carried with her the whole way from slavery. She writes about the ocean being freedom, that fish swim freely, that there is a agoraphobic openness available to the eye on the ocean. But a runaway on a whaling ship is also just another form of captivity. The McKissicks write that life as a sailor could be equally as bad as slavery. Josephine notes cramped conditions, and the whole whaling culture, in fact, is about chasing down lone whales. I mean, yeah, so you separate the whale from its pack. It's vulnerable. The metaphorical links are pretty obvious. Captivity and freedom. This is where the skeletal and full flesh fish so you have got to be quiet. I'm trying to send these edits.
Sometimes I feel like it's a conspiracy theory. I like these links between the time periods, and I'm finding people and stories lost at the junctures between different areas of history. The records of what Anne's house was first like got me interested in this imagery and this time period, but it's continued because of the way the imagery leaps across the geography and the timeline. I mean, another century later, we find the same imagery on the Great Plains. But, you know, in those junctures, I learned about whaling history. I learned about the legal battles in Connecticut. And, you know, that finally tied in with the printing history all over North America, not even just the USA. Those links are what's interesting, and the misinterpretation of certain parts of that history that then become part of history, that's what's making up our understanding of what America is today and what it has been.